In the city of Dallas, a devastating tragedy has left the Harrison family in utter despair. Emily, a brilliant 22-year-old, has been in a coma for 6 months after a terrible accident. Her millionaire parents, Robert and Margaret, watch helplessly as the doctors consider her a lost cause. After exhausting all modern medical options, the family embarks on a desperate journey to a temple in Los Angeles, holding on to their last spark of hope. There, their lives intersect with Danny, a 12-year-old boy living on the streets, an orphan abandoned by the world, yet gifted with an inexplicable ability to feel others' pain. In a moment of pure, innocent faith, Danny performs a simple yet powerful gesture that defies all the laws of medicine and reason. What happens when his small hands touch Emily's feet will not only change the fate of the Harrison family, but will also redefine the meaning of miracle, family, and unconditional love. This is a story that proves sometimes the greatest miracles come from the most unlikely hearts, and that love has the power to awaken even what seems lost forever.
Hello. Before we begin, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like. At the end, please rate the story. I will be happy to respond to you in the comments. Now, let's get to the story.
The Texas afternoon hung over Dallas like a suffocating blanket. But inside Presbyterian Hospital, the air conditioning kept the halls so cold it felt like it seeped into your bones. Robert Harrison walked down the Italian marble floor, his footsteps echoing through the heavy silence that defined the VIP wing of the most expensive hospital in the country. His Armani suit, which once gave him power and authority in boardrooms, now felt like an empty shell over a broken man. 6 months. 6 long months since his life shattered into pieces impossible to put back together. The memory of the phone call still haunted him in sleepless nights. The trembling voice of the officer, the words jumbled in his mind. Accident, critical condition, come immediately. The world had stopped in that moment, as if someone slammed the brakes on his existence. Margaret was where she had been for months, sitting in the beige leather chair beside bed 412, holding Emily's pale hand. Her blonde hair, once always perfect, now showed streaks of gray she no longer cared to hide. The delicate hands, which once organized Dallas's most elegant charity dinners, now trembled constantly, marked by tension and hopelessness. "How is she today?" Robert asked, his voice hoarse from carrying the weight of the question he asked every day, always hoping for a different answer. Margaret didn't take her eyes off Emily's serene face. The same as yesterday, the same as 6 months ago. Her voice carried the exhaustion of someone who had cried every possible tear, only to find there were more. Emily Harrison, 22 years old, a graduate in literature from Southern Methodist University, had dreamed of becoming a writer. Her notebooks were still scattered across her bedroom at home, full of unfinished stories that now seemed prophetic. There, lying in the hospital bed, connected to a symphony of machines keeping her body alive, she looked like a broken porcelain doll someone was trying to keep intact. The heart monitor emitted a constant, monotonous beep, like a metronome marking the time of a song no one else could hear. The ventilator whispered its artificial rhythm, inflating and emptying Emily's lungs with surgical precision. Tubes snaked through her arm, delivering nutrients and medication to a body that seemed to have forgotten how to live on its own. "Mr. and Mrs. Harrison?" The deep voice of Dr. Stevens cut through the silence like a blade. The neurologist, a man in his early 50s with graying hair and tired eyes, approached holding Emily's medical file. Robert recognized that look. He had seen it on every doctor who had tried to help Emily over the past months. "Dr. Stevens?" Robert stood and adjusted his tie in a nervous habit he'd developed since the accident. "Any news on the latest tests?" The doctor sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of all unmet expectations. "I'd like to speak with you privately. There are some things we need to discuss." Margaret finally lifted her swollen blue eyes. "You can talk here, doctor. Emily has always known everything that's going on in our family. We're not going to start hiding now." Dr. Stevens pulled up a chair and sat facing the couple. The simple gesture carried a gravity that made Robert's heart race. "You know, we tried every available option. The 3 surgeries to reduce brain swelling, experimental drugs imported from Germany, stem cell therapies, even the alternative treatments you requested. And?" Robert asked, though he didn't want to hear the answer. "The latest MRIs confirmed what we feared. The brainstem injury is irreversible. Emily has shown no significant neural activity for months. There is nothing medicine can do anymore. The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret felt the floor vanish beneath her feet, like she was falling into a bottomless pit. Robert closed his eyes, trying to process words his heart refused to accept. 6 months ago, you hired me to give Emily the best chance possible. Dr. Stevens continued, his voice gentle but firm. We brought in specialists from Johns Hopkins, Mayo Clinic, even overseas. We spent, he paused, realizing money didn't matter now. We tried everything, absolutely everything. Margaret squeezed Emily's hand tighter, as if she could transfer her own life force to her daughter. But she's still here, still breathing. Her heart is still beating. Only with the support of machines, Mrs. Harrison. Emily hasn't breathed on her own in 4 months. No reflexes, no response to stimuli. Medically speaking, No! Margaret stood abruptly, her voice echoing through the room. Don't say that. Don't say those words. She is my daughter. My girl. She will come back to me. Robert stepped toward his wife, placing his hands on her trembling shoulders. He barely managed to stand himself, but he knew Margaret was falling apart right before his eyes. I understand how you feel, Dr. Stevens said, also standing. But I need to be honest. Emily will not improve. There will be no miracles. Sometimes the hardest thing is accepting that we did everything we could. The doctor's words echoed like stones thrown into a still lake. Margaret looked at Emily, at the angelic face that seemed only asleep, at the brown curls spread across the white pillow. She remembered when her daughter was little, how she used to lie beside her to tell bedtime stories. Emily always asked for one more story, Mommy, even when her eyes were heavy with sleep. Doctor, Robert's voice came out as a rough whisper. How much time? Life support can maintain basic functions indefinitely, but you need to consider quality versus quantity. Emily is no longer here with us. You're keeping a body alive, but the girl you knew and loved. He didn't finish the sentence. Doctor. Stevens straightened his coat and headed for the door. I'll leave you alone to process this. When you're ready to talk about next steps, I'll be in my office. The door clicked softly closed, leaving the Harrison family alone with the weight of a truth no amount of money could change. Robert sank into the armchair, suddenly feeling much older than his 55 years. All his achievements, the empire he built, all his influence in Dallas. It all meant nothing in the face of the helplessness of not being able to save his only daughter. Margaret returned to Emily's side, slowly sitting down in the chair that had become her second home. She took her daughter's hand in hers, closing her eyes and trying to feel any signal, any movement, any sign that Emily was still fighting. Remember when you were 7 and broke your arm trying to fly off the roof? Margaret began, her voice catching. You insisted you'd seen Peter Pan and that you could fly too. Spent 3 hours in the hospital crying. Not because of the pain, but because you wanted to try again. Tears streamed freely down Margaret's face as she stroked Emily's hair. You never gave up on anything, my girl. Never. When they said you wouldn't get into SMU, you studied until you earned a scholarship. When your first story was rejected, you wrote 10 more until someone published one. Robert watched his wife speak to Emily as if she could hear, as if the words could penetrate the veil between consciousness and emptiness. Part of him envied Margaret's ability to still hope, to still believe that love could be stronger than science. The doctors don't know you like I do, Margaret continued, her voice gaining desperate determination. They don't know you cried for 3 days when you found a hurt bird in the garden. They don't know you'd always wake up in the middle of the night to check if I was okay when I was sick. They don't know you have the strongest soul I've ever known. The heart monitor kept its hypnotic rhythm, indifferent to a mother's shattered pleas. Margaret kissed Emily's forehead, feeling the cold, lifeless skin beneath her lips. I can't give up on you, my girl, she whispered, her words lost in the constant hum of the machines. No matter what the doctors say, no matter if everyone thinks there's no hope left, you are my daughter, and I will fight for you until my last breath. The Texas afternoon carried on outside, indifferent to the drama unfolding in room 412. In the hallway, nurses passed with soft footsteps, visitors whispered on benches, and life went on relentlessly. But inside that room, Time seemed to have stopped 6 months ago, trapped in an endless moment of pain where a mother refused to accept the fate that had been handed to her. Margaret held Emily's hand with a strength that defied all medical science, as if love could be stronger than death, as if a mother's determination could rewrite the laws of nature. And while the machines continued their mechanical symphony, she kept whispering words of love and hope to a daughter who might never hear them again. 3 days had passed since the last meeting with Dr. Stevens, and room 412 had become a sanctuary of silence and pain. Margaret hadn't left the hospital since then, sleeping in the uncomfortable chair beside Emily's bed, surviving only on the sandwiches Robert brought from the cafeteria. Her eyes, swollen and red, were fixed on her daughter's face as if she could will her to wake up through the intensity of her gaze. Robert entered the room carrying 2 cups of coffee, steam escaping through the small openings in the plastic lids. The strong institutional coffee smell mixed with the sterile scent of disinfectant that permeated every corner of the hospital. He watched Margaret for a moment, noticing how she constantly whispered to Emily, sometimes telling childhood stories, other times simply repeating, "Mommy's here. My girl, Mommy's right here." "Margaret," he said softly, offering her one of the cups. "You need to eat something. You won't help Emily if you get sick." She took the coffee with trembling hands but didn't take a sip. "Robert, I've been thinking all night about what Dr. Stevens said, about there being no more medical hope. I know it's hard to accept, but—" "No, listen." Margaret cut him off, turning to face him. Her eyes, despite exhaustion, shone with a determination he hadn't seen in months. "He said there's no more medical hope." "Medical, Robert. But what if there's another kind of hope?" Robert frowned, not understanding where his wife was going. "What are you talking about?" Margaret took a deep breath, as if gathering courage to voice a thought that had been forming in her mind. "Last night, when you went home to take a shower, I was here alone with Emily. I was so desperate that I started to pray. I know we were never religious, that we always believed more in science than in anything spiritual, but Robert, I was praying." He moved closer and sat in the chair beside the bed. "And then a nurse came in to check Emily's vital signs. She saw I was crying and asked if I needed anything. I ended up telling her about what Dr. Stevens said, about there being no hope." Margaret paused, her hands gripping the coffee cup tightly. "She told me about a place, Robert. A place people like us go when doctors give up." Robert felt a tightening in his chest. He'd known his wife for 25 years and could tell when she was desperate enough to cling to any hope, no matter how fragile. "She told me about the Temple of Hope in Los Angeles," Margaret continued, her voice gaining urgency. "She said she knows people who got healed there, people the doctors had given up on. Miracles, Robert. Real miracles." "Margaret," Robert started, but she interrupted him again. "I know what you're thinking, that it's desperation, that it's crazy. But what if it's not? What if there's something beyond medicine? What if Emily is waiting for it?" Tears began to roll down Margaret's face. "We tried everything science could offer. We spent millions on treatments, brought in the best doctors in the world. But what if the answer lies somewhere else?" Robert looked at Emily, her serene face unchanged for 6 months. He was a practical man who had built his fortune on facts, numbers, and rational analysis. The idea of seeking a spiritual cure contradicted everything he had ever believed. Yet, at the same time, when he looked at his daughter and saw the absolute desperation in Margaret's eyes, he realized his rationality meant nothing compared to the possibility of losing Emily forever. "Tell me about this temple," he finally said, his voice low and weary. Margaret took out her phone and showed him some pages she had researched during the early morning hours. "It's run by a pastor named David Miller. He has a special gift for spiritual healings. There are hundreds of testimonies from people healed of cancer, paralysis, even vegetative states like Emily's." Robert looked at the images on the phone. A modern and spacious temple, crowds of people praying, hopeful faces lifting their hands toward the sky. There was something about the abundance of hope in those photos that both attracted and frightened him. "Even if I agreed," he said hesitantly, "how would we get Emily there? She depends on machines." "I already thought about that. Margaret stood up, pacing nervously around the room. "We can hire a private ambulance specialized in long-distance transport. They have portable medical equipment, specialized nurses. It's expensive, but—" "Money's not a problem," Robert interrupted automatically. It was the answer he always gave, although lately, he realized money couldn't buy the only things that really mattered. Margaret stopped by the window, looking out over the city of Dallas stretching to the horizon. "I know it might sound crazy, Robert. I know we've spent our whole lives being rational, logical people. But our daughter is dying, and logic isn't saving her." Silence weighed heavily between them for long minutes. Robert looked at Emily, at the machines keeping her body functioning, at the monitors recording vital signs but no real life. He thought about all the doctors they had consulted, all the experimental treatments, all the promises that had proven empty. "Okay," he said finally, his voice carrying a mix of resignation and desperate hope. "Let's go to Los Angeles." Margaret turned quickly, relief tears streaming down her face. "Are you sure?" "I'm not sure of anything anymore," Robert admitted, standing and walking to Emily. He gently touched his daughter's face, feeling the cold skin beneath his fingers. "But if there's a chance, no matter how small, that our girl can come back to us, then it's worth trying." The next 2 days were a marathon of logistics. Robert used all his contacts to arrange a specialized medical transport ambulance, complete with a mobile ICU and 2 nurses trained in critical care. Margaret obsessively researched the Temple of Hope, reading every testimony, watching every video, as if she could absorb faith through the computer-screened doctor. Stevens didn't approve the trip but agreed to provide all medical records and instructions for the nurses accompanying Emily. "I understand you need to try everything," he said, his voice heavy with understanding and a hint of professional skepticism. "Just make sure she receives proper medical care the entire time." On Thursday morning, the ambulance arrived at Presbyterian Hospital. It was an impressive vehicle, white and gleaming, equipped with cutting-edge medical technology. Robert watched the nurses, Jennifer, a middle-aged woman with a gentle but professional demeanor, and Marcus, a young man with steady hands and precise movements, prepare Emily for transport. "It'll be a long trip," Jennifer explained as she checked the equipment. "About 20 hours on the road, with stops for rest and vital signs checks. She'll remain stable the whole trip." Margaret held Emily's hand as they transferred her to the ambulance stretcher. "We're going to a special place, my girl," she whispered. "A place where miracles happen. You just have to hold on a little longer." The journey began at 10 a.m., with Robert and Margaret seated in the back of the ambulance, watching Emily lying on the stretcher, connected to portable versions of the equipment that had become part of their lives. The heart monitor beeped steadily, now accompanied by the constant sound of the engine and wheels on asphalt. The first hours were the hardest. Margaret couldn't stop watching Emily, searching for any sign of discomfort or change. Every curve in the road, every brake, every acceleration made her tense, as if Emily would break from the movement. "She's fine," Jennifer assured, checking the monitors. "Vitals are stable. She's not in any discomfort." As they moved from Dallas into the Texas desert, the landscape began to change. Endless plains stretched in every direction, dotted only by occasional cacti and rocks. The sun beat down relentlessly, creating heat waves that distorted the horizon. "Remember when we took Emily to see the Grand Canyon?" Margaret asked suddenly, watching the arid scenery past the window. She was 16 and insisted on hiking to the bottom. Said she wanted to see how the world looked from the bottom up. Robert smiled faintly. "She's always been curious about different perspectives. Always wanted to see things from angles others ignored. And now she's seeing from an angle we can't reach," Margaret whispered, tears dripping onto their clasped hands. Hours passed slowly. They stopped in Midland to refuel and check equipment. Robert stretched his legs while the nurses examined Emily, but Margaret refused to leave the ambulance. "I won't leave her alone," she insisted, even though Emily was clearly unconscious as the sun began to set. Painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, they crossed into New Mexico. The landscape grew even more desolate, with Rocky Mountains rising like silent sentinels against the darkening sky. "Do you think we're doing the right thing?" Margaret asked during a rest stop in Roswell. She sat beside Emily, holding her hand, watching her daughter's still face under the soft ambulance light. Robert, trying to rest on a folding chair, opened his eyes. "Honestly, I don't know. But I know if we don't try, we'll regret it forever. And what if it doesn't work? What if we get there and nothing happens? Then at least we'll know we tried everything. Absolutely everything." The night brought a different challenge. Emily needed constant care, and the nurses took turns monitoring her vitals. Margaret dozed off for only a few minutes at a time, waking every time she heard a change in the monitor's rhythm. During an early morning stop in Arizona, Marcus noticed a slight change in Emily's vital signs. "It's nothing serious," he explained, adjusting some equipment. "Just her body responding to the altitude change. It's normal." But Margaret panicked. "Is she getting worse? Should we turn back? Maybe this whole thing was a mistake." "Calm down, Mrs. Harrison," Jennifer said gently, placing a hand on Margaret's shoulder. "She's fine. Her vitals have stabilized. Sometimes environmental changes cause small fluctuations, but it doesn't mean she's getting worse." As the sun rose over the Arizona mountains, Robert watched the landscape change again. The desert gave way to rocky hills, then lush valleys, and finally the first signs that they were approaching Los Angeles. "How many miles left?" Margaret asked, her voice hoarse from exhaustion and anxiety. "About 2 hours," Marcus answered, checking the GPS. "We should arrive at the temple around 10 a.m. Margaret squeezed Emily's hand tighter. "Did you hear that, my girl? We're almost there. Almost at the place where you'll be okay." When they finally saw the first signs of Los Angeles, traffic grew heavier. The ambulance navigated between cars, trucks, and motorcycles, while Robert nervously watched every move. His entire fortune, influence, and determination had come down to this moment, taking his daughter to a place where maybe, just maybe, a miracle could happen. The Temple of Hope was located on a broad avenue in downtown Los Angeles, a modern glass and concrete building standing out among the surrounding commercial buildings. But what really caught the eye were the hundreds of people gathered outside. There were people in wheelchairs, others leaning on crutches, entire families kneeling in prayer on the sidewalk. Some held signs with photos of loved ones. Others simply prayed with closed eyes, hands lifted toward the sky. The air vibrated with murmurs of prayers in different languages, creating a symphony of desperate hope. "My God," Margaret whispered, watching through the ambulance window. "There are so many people." The ambulance stopped in front of the temple, and Robert could see many in the crowd looking their way with curiosity and hope. Some approached, as if the ambulance's presence somehow validated the possibility that miracles really happened here. Jennifer and Marcus started preparing Emily for transfer to the temple, but Margaret suddenly felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment. After 6 months of pain, after nearly 20 hours of travel, they had finally reached the place where their last hope resided. "And now?" she asked, her voice trembling. Robert took her hand, feeling a mix of hope and terror that threatened to consume him. "Part 3 now we pray," Robert replied, his voice carrying a determination he didn't know he had. "We pray like we never have before." Marcus and Jennifer worked with quiet efficiency, preparing Emily to be transferred from the ambulance. Margaret watched every movement anxiously, as if her vigilance could protect her daughter from any unseen danger. The portable machines kept their hypnotic rhythm, creating a bubble of medical technology amid the spiritual chaos surrounding them. "I'm going to need you to sign some papers," Jennifer explained, handing a clipboard to Robert, "confirming that you take full responsibility for the decision to bring Emily here." As Robert signed the documents, Margaret looked at the crowd gathered outside the temple. There was an elderly woman in a wheelchair, her arthritic hands clasped in fervent prayer. A young man, apparently blind, held a photo to his chest while tears ran down his face. A Hispanic family knelt on the sidewalk, their faces lifted to the sky, singing a supplication in Spanish. "All of them," Margaret whispered, "they're here for the same reason we are. They've all lost hope in medicine." Robert agreed, watching the scene with a mix of compassion and recognition. They've all come to the same place we have. The ambulance doors opened, and they were immediately surrounded by curious onlookers. It wasn't an invasion of privacy, just looks filled with understanding and solidarity. It was as if everyone there recognized each other as members of an invisible brotherhood, united by pain and hope. A tall, thin man wearing a simple but well-kept suit approached the ambulance. He looked to be about 50, with gray hair slicked back and eyes that seemed to have seen as much suffering as compassion. His presence radiated a calm that contrasted with the restlessness around him. "You must be the Harrison family," he said, extending his hand to Robert. "I'm Pastor Williams. I got your call last night." Pastor Williams. Robert shook the man's hand, feeling a warm firmness in the grip. "Thank you for having us. I know it must be hard with all these people." "There's no such thing as too many people when it comes to hope," the pastor replied, then turned to Margaret. "Mrs. Harrison, I can see the love you have for your daughter in your eyes. That love is what brought us here." Margaret only managed a nod, too emotional to speak. The pastor looked at Emily being carefully transferred into a special hospital wheelchair, his expression softening even more. "Emily," he murmured as if speaking to an old friend, "you have finally come home." The wheelchair was unlike anything Margaret had ever seen. It looked custom-designed for cases like Emily's, fully reclining, with head support and space for the portable medical equipment. Marcus and Jennifer worked to connect the machines to the chair, creating a mobile unit that kept Emily stable. "How long has she been like this?" Pastor Williams asked gently, looking at Emily with eyes full of compassion. 6 months, Margaret managed to say, her voice breaking. 6 months since the accident. The doctors said there's nothing more they can do. The pastor nodded slowly. Doctors do what they can with the tools they have. But there are forces in this universe beyond medicine. Forces that work through faith, love, and hope. He gestured to the crowd around them. "Do you see all these people? Each one arrived here after the doctors said, 'There's nothing more we can do.' And many of them found what they were looking for." "Many?" Robert asked, a spark of hope lighting up his eyes. "Come," the pastor said, beginning to push Emily's wheelchair toward the temple. "Let me show you." The crowd naturally parted to let them through, as if they recognized something sacred happening in that moment. Margaret walked beside the chair, holding Emily's hand, while Robert followed just behind, watching the hopeful faces around them. "That woman there," the pastor quietly pointed to a middle-aged lady praying earnestly, "brought her son here 3 months ago. He had been given up on with terminal cancer. Today, he's home, playing with his grandchildren." Margaret felt her heart quicken. "Really? And that man in the corner," the pastor continued, "was paralyzed for 5 years. Now he walks. Not fast, not without struggle, but he walks." The temple doors opened before them, revealing a large, bright space. It was modern but carried an atmosphere of reverence. Light-colored wooden pews stretched in neat rows, but what caught your eye most was the central area. A circular space where several people in wheelchairs or stretchers were positioned, all surrounded by family members in prayer. "This is our healing circle," Pastor Williams explained, guiding Emily's chair to the center. "This is where we focus our collective energy, our faith, our hope." The atmosphere inside the temple was unlike anything Margaret had ever experienced. It wasn't just the reverent silence. It was as if the very air was charged with expectation. People whispered prayers in dozens of languages, creating a low, constant symphony of supplication. Marcus and Jennifer adjusted Emily's equipment, making sure everything was working perfectly. The heart monitor kept its steady beep, but somehow, in the temple's context, the sound felt less clinical and more like a rhythmic beat of hope. "You can kneel here," the pastor indicated 2 cushions beside Emily's chair. "Place your hands on her. Let your love flow through touch." Margaret immediately knelt beside her daughter, her hands trembling as she touched Emily's pale face. Robert hesitated for a moment. This whole situation challenged his rational nature, but then he looked at Emily, at his clearly desperate wife, and knelt on the other side. "We don't know how to pray," Margaret admitted, tears already streaming down her face. We've never been religious people. We don't know the right words. There are no right words, Pastor Williams said softly, placing his hands over Margaret and Robert's. Just speak from your heart. Say what you feel. Ask for what you need. Margaret closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of the pastor's hands over hers. Emily, she began, her voice catching. My beloved girl, if you can hear me wherever you are, know that Mom and Dad are here. We're fighting for you. Robert, initially uncomfortable with the moment, gradually began to surrender to its emotion. Emily, you've always been stronger than any of us. You always found a way to overcome every obstacle. Please, find a way back to us. Around the circle, other families began joining in prayer. The elderly woman in the wheelchair rolled closer, extending her arthritic hands over Emily. The young man who appeared blind cautiously approached, knelt, and added his voice to the chorus of supplications. Lord, a female voice rose. This family has traveled so far, sacrificed so much. Please let your daughter return to them. May the light heal what the darkness has taken. Another voice added. Margaret felt tears streaming freely down her face. Please, she whispered. Please, I'll give anything. My life, my soul, everything I have. Just give me my daughter back. Pastor Williams began to pray louder, his voice carrying a spiritual authority that made everyone in the temple stop and listen. Heavenly Father, we gather here today on behalf of Emily Harrison, a young woman whose life was interrupted by circumstances beyond our understanding. Her family has traveled across the country, leaving behind everything they knew because they believe in your healing power. The crowd in the temple murmured amen at intervals, forming a rhythm of agreement echoing off the walls. We do not question your methods, Lord, the pastor continued. We do not claim to understand your plans, but we beg you, in the name of Jesus Christ, to consider this family's pain. Consider the love they have for Emily. Consider the faith that brought them here. Margaret felt as if she was being enveloped by a wave of emotion that wasn't just hers alone. It was as though all the pain, hope, and faith of everyone in the temple was converging around Emily's chair. Emily, she whispered directly into her daughter's ear. Remember when you were little and had nightmares? You always ran to my room, and I held you until you felt safe. I'm holding you now, my girl. I'm here. Find your way back to me. Robert, who had started the prayer skeptical, now found himself completely overcome with emotion. Emily, you are all we have. You are our joy, our hope, our reason to carry on. Without you, the world doesn't make sense. Time seemed to stand still inside the temple. Morning sunlight filtered through stained glass windows, creating rainbow patterns dancing across Emily's face. Margaret watched every shadow, every reflection, searching for any sign of movement, any indication that the prayers were being heard. Stronger, Pastor Williams commanded, his voice now filled with urgency. Pray stronger. Let your faith shake the very foundations of heaven. The energy in the temple intensified. People began praying with increased fervor, their voices rising in a crescendo of desperate hope. Margaret and Robert held tightly to each other's hands across Emily's motionless body, their tears falling onto her still face. Please, Margaret cried out, her voice breaking under 6 months of bottled anguish. Please, I'm begging you. She's only 22. She has so much life left to live, so many stories left to write, so many dreams left to fulfill. The monitors around Emily continued their mechanical chorus, indifferent to the spiritual storm raging around them. But Margaret refused to let the sound of machines drown out the sound of hope. She leaned closer, pressing her forehead against her daughter's cool cheek. I love you, Emily, she whispered. I love you more than life itself. Come back to me, my beautiful girl. Come back to your mama. Just 2 blocks from the Temple of Hope, leaning against the faded brick wall of an abandoned building, Danny Rodriguez watched the steady flow of people entering and leaving the glass building. His clothes, a faded blue t-shirt with holes in the elbows and jeans twice his size, held up by a piece of rope, seemed to swallow him. making his 12 years seem even more fragile against the harsh vastness of the city. Danny's stomach growled fiercely, a feeling as familiar as the sound of cars passing on the street. The only thing he had eaten was a discarded bagel he found in a bakery dumpster the morning before. Even then, he'd shared half with Zeus, the black and white stray who had become his inseparable companion on the streets of Los Angeles. "Look at this, Zeus," Danny whispered to the dog curled up at his feet, ribs visible through his dirty fur. "All these people going into that fancy place. Must be nice to have somewhere to go." Zeus lifted his head, his brown eyes reflecting an understanding beyond the normal capacity of an animal. It was as if he knew the boy wasn't really talking about the temple, but about a deeper feeling of not belonging anywhere. Danny had been living on the streets for 2 years, ever since his mother, Carmen, died of an overdose in a dirty alley downtown. His father had disappeared long before, leaving only vague memories of a man who smelled of beer and broken promises. After Carmen's death, Danny was placed in a foster home but ran away at the first chance. The foster family was kind, but he couldn't stand the pitying looks, the feeling of being a burden, a lost cause. Least on the streets, he had control over his own fate, even if that fate was uncertain and dangerous. But Danny had something most people didn't, a gift he didn't fully understand. From a very young age, he always knew when someone was in trouble. It wasn't just intuition, it was like he could feel other people's pain as a physical pressure in his chest. When his mother was about to have a crisis, he knew hours before. When other homeless people were sick or injured, he found them before they even asked for help. It was a strange gift for a child barely able to take care of himself. That morning, as he watched the temple, Danny felt something different in the air, an energy that made his skin tingle, like an electric storm was coming. But the sky was clear, without a single cloud. "Do you feel that too?" he asked Zeus, who had stood up and was now staring intently toward the temple, ears perked and alert. That's when Danny saw the ambulance arriving. He watched nurses wheel a young woman in a wheelchair, surrounded by medical machines. He saw a man and a woman, obviously her parents, walking beside the chair, their faces twisted in anguish. Danny recognized immediately. The pressure in his chest intensified dramatically. It was like someone was squeezing his heart with a giant hand. Danny gasped, bending over, hands pressed to his chest. "What the hell?" he muttered, struggling to breathe. But along with the pain came an absolute certainty. Someone inside that temple needed help. Not just medical or financial help, but something deeper. Something Danny, somehow, could offer. Zeus started walking toward the temple, looking back as if expecting Danny to follow. The boy hesitated, looking down at his dirty clothes, his hands that hadn't seen soap in days, and the worn-out sneakers with holes exposing his toes. "I can't go in there," he muttered to Zeus. "Look at me. They'll kick me out before I even step through the door." But the pressure in his chest wouldn't ease. If anything, it was growing stronger. Danny closed his eyes, trying to understand what his body was telling him. Images started forming in his mind, not exactly visions but impressions. A young woman in a hospital bed, parents crying, a feeling of something lost that needed to be found. "Mom," he whispered, a word that still hurt when spoken. "Mom, if you're up there, tell me what I should do." A soft breeze blew down the street, even though the air had been perfectly still moments before. Danny felt like his mother was there, placing her warm hand on his shoulder as she used to when he was little and scared. "You've always been my special boy," he almost heard her voice say. "You have a gift, sweetheart. Use it to help others." Danny opened his eyes, seeing Zeus already halfway to the temple, walking with a determination that matched the growing certainty in his own heart. He stood up slowly, legs trembling, not from hunger, but from nerves. "All right," he said to himself, starting to walk. "All right, if they kick me out, at least I tried." As he approached the temple, Danny could hear sounds coming from inside. Voices raised in prayer, muffled sobs, whispers of hope. The pressure in his chest was now so intense he could barely breathe. But there was something else. A feeling of purpose he hadn't felt in a long time. The crowd in front of the temple was bigger than it looked from a distance. People of all ages and backgrounds had gathered. some in wheelchairs, others leaning on crutches, all united by a shared expression of desperate hope. Danny hesitated on the edge of the crowd, suddenly aware of how he must look: dirty clothes, unkempt hair, a face streaked with grime. He could feel a few curious stares and instinctively crossed his arms over his chest, trying to hide the holes in his shirt. "Maybe this is a mistake," he muttered to Zeus, who had stopped beside him. But then he noticed something that surprised him. Among the crowd were others who didn't look much different from him: a worn-out elderly man, a young woman holding a child, both dressed in clearly second-hand clothes. People who clearly didn't have much money but were here anyway, looking for something money couldn't buy. "It's not about what you wear," a gentle voice said behind him. Danny turned to see a middle-aged woman with gray hair and kind eyes. "It's about what you carry in your heart." I'm not sure I should be here," Danny stammered, cheeks flushing. "Dear," the woman said, placing a warm hand on his shoulder, "if you felt something that brought you here, then you belong here. God doesn't care about your clothes." Danny looked at her, seeing a sincerity in her eyes that deeply touched him. "There's someone inside who needs help. I can feel it." The woman studied his face for a moment, and Danny saw something shift in her expression. "You have a gift, don't you? You can feel when people are suffering." Danny nodded slowly, surprised that someone understood so easily. "Then you definitely belong here," she said, gesturing toward the temple entrance. "Come. Let me help you get inside." Together they moved through the crowd. The woman, who introduced herself as Helen, spoke with what looked like volunteers, explaining that Danny had felt a call to be here. To Danny's surprise, no one questioned his appearance or age. It was as if, once inside the temple's context, normal social distinctions didn't matter. The temple doors opened before them, and Danny was immediately hit by a wave of emotion that nearly knocked him down. It wasn't just the emotion of the people inside. It was something deeper, an energy that seemed to pulse through the very walls. "Wow," he whispered, his eyes adjusting to the soft light inside. The temple was larger than it looked from outside, with wooden pews arranged in neat rows. But what really caught his attention was the center circle, where a young woman sat in a wheelchair, surrounded by medical machines and two people who were obviously her parents. The pressure in Danny's chest increased exponentially. It was her, the person he had sensed, the one who needed help. "That's Emily," Helen whispered beside him. "She's been in a coma for 6 months. Her parents brought her here hoping for a miracle." Danny watched the scene in the center of the temple. The parents knelt beside the chair, hands on their daughter, tears streaming down their faces as they prayed with an intensity he could feel deep in his soul. Around them, others had formed a circle, voices rising in prayer. "I need to go there," Danny said, his voice barely audible. Helen looked at him in surprise. "Are you sure? They're having a very private moment." "I have to," Danny said, this time with more conviction. "I don't know why, but I have to." Zeus, who had been quiet beside Danny, suddenly started walking toward the center of the temple. He moved through the crowd as if he knew exactly where he was going, his paws making only soft sounds on the wooden floor. Danny hesitated just a moment before following the dog. Each step toward the center of the temple made the pressure in his chest stronger, but it also brought a growing sense that he was doing the right thing. People naturally stepped aside to let him pass, as if recognizing something special about his presence. Danny could feel curious stares, but also an acceptance that surprised him. It was like, in this sacred place, he finally belonged somewhere. When he reached the edge of the prayer circle, Danny stopped. The young woman in the wheelchair was so still, so quiet, that for a moment he thought maybe it was already too late. Then he noticed the barely perceptible rise and fall of her chest, the gentle beeping of the machines monitoring her vital signs. She was alive. Just lost. Danny looked at the parents, seeing a pain in their eyes that mirrored what he'd felt when he lost his mother. A pain beyond words, beyond reason, beyond anything medicine or money could heal. It was a pain he somehow knew he could help. Taking a deep breath, Danny stepped further into the circle, hands trembling but determination growing. He didn't know what he would do when he got there, but he knew he had to try. Zeus was already lying quietly beside the wheelchair, as if guarding Emily. The dog lifted his head as Danny approached, and for a moment, the boy and the animal exchanged a look of mutual understanding. Then Danny took the final step, fully entering the sacred circle where a desperate family prayed for a miracle only he, somehow inexplicably, could help make happen. The sacred circle around Emily seemed to pulse with its own energy as Danny took his final step inside. The voices in prayer created a constant murmur that wrapped the space like an invisible embrace, but Danny could barely hear anything beyond the sound of his own heart pounding fiercely against his ribs. Then he saw two men in dark suits moving toward him with determined expressions. Temple security, Danny realized with a tightening in his stomach. Of course, there would be security. Of course, a dirty, ragged street kid wouldn't be welcome at such an intimate moment. "Sorry, kid?" one of the men said, approaching with firm but not aggressive steps. "You can't be here. This is a restricted area." The other security guard, a shorter man with graying hair, gently extended his hand. "Come on, son. There's a place in the back where you can sit and watch." Danny felt his cheeks burn with shame. His hands automatically went to the holes in his t-shirt, trying to cover them. I just wanted to." "No." A woman's voice interrupted, clear and firm despite being choked with emotion. "Let him stay." All eyes turned to Margaret, who had lifted her head from her intense prayers to look directly at Danny. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying, but there was something in them Danny couldn't place. A softness that contrasted with the hardness he was used to seeing on adults' faces. "Margaret," Robert murmured, his voice carrying a tone of warning. "Maybe this isn't appropriate. This is a private moment for our family." "No," Margaret repeated, this time looking at her husband with an intensity that made Robert stop mid-sentence. "Look at him, Robert. Really look at him." Robert followed his wife's gaze and saw Danny for the first time not as an intrusion, but as a boy. A boy no older than 12, wearing clothes that looked like they'd been gathered from all over, hair unkempt and obviously not cut in months, and eyes that seemed to carry far more experience than any child should have. But there was something else. Something in the way Danny looked at Emily. Not with the morbid curiosity Robert had seen in others, but with a deep understanding that seemed beyond his years. "I'm sorry," Danny said, his voice barely audible over the prayers around him. "I didn't mean to interrupt. It's just, I felt like she needed help." Margaret felt something stir in her chest. "You felt that?" Danny nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving Emily's face. "I always feel it when someone needs help. I don't know why. My mom said it was a gift, but..." He shrugged, as if he didn't know how to explain it. "Where are your parents?" Robert asked, his voice softer now. "Dead," Danny answered simply, making Margaret choke back a sob. "My mom died 2 years ago. My dad, well, he was never really around." The security guards exchanged uncertain looks, clearly unsure how to handle the situation. Pastor Williams, who had been quietly praying, stepped closer with an interested expression. "What's your name, son?" he asked kindly. Danny Rodriguez." "And where do you live, Danny?" Danny hesitated, eyes dropping to the floor. "On the streets. I take care of myself." Margaret felt like someone had punched her in the stomach. This boy, this child, was living alone on the streets while she and Robert worried about problems that suddenly seemed smaller by comparison. "How long?" she asked, her voice breaking. 2 years, Danny repeated. "Since my mom died." "My God," Margaret whispered, covering her mouth with her hand. Robert felt something shifting inside him. His initial resistance to the boy's presence was melting away, replaced by a mix of compassion and curiosity. "You said you feel it when someone needs help?" Danny nodded. "It's like a pressure in my chest. It gets stronger the closer I get to the person." "With your daughter," he looked at Emily. "It's the strongest feeling I've ever had." Pastor Williams studied Danny with eyes that seemed to see beyond the surface. "You have a spiritual gift, young man. Something that can't be taught or learned. Only accepted." "Can I?" Danny hesitated, glancing between Margaret and Robert. "Can I pray with you?" The question hung in the air for a moment. Margaret looked at her husband, seeing the internal struggle reflected in his eyes. Robert had always been a practical man, someone who believed in facts and science. But the past 6 months had tested all his beliefs, bringing him to a place where he was willing to try anything. "I think," Robert said slowly, "that right now, we could use all the help we can get." Margaret felt fresh tears welling in her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, please. Pray with us." Danny felt a wave of relief and gratitude that nearly knocked him off balance. He moved carefully around the wheelchair, positioning himself near Emily's feet. His legs shook as he knelt on the cold floor, his small, dirty hands clasped in front of him. "I've never prayed in a temple before," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "I don't even know if I'm doing it right." "There's no right or wrong way," Margaret said gently. "Just speak from your heart." Danny closed his eyes, feeling the pressure in his chest intensify even more. It was as if Emily were trying to communicate with him, trying to tell him something he couldn't fully understand. "God," he began, his voice trembling, "I don't know much about you. My mom used to talk about you sometimes, but we never really went to church. But I know you must be good, 'cause my mom always said you take care of people who don't have anyone else." Margaret felt her heart break hearing the boy's simple but profound words. "This family," Danny continued, tears starting to roll down his face, "they love Emily so much. I can feel their love. It's like a warm light around her. And she must know that, even if she can't wake up." Robert felt something move in his chest, an emotion he couldn't name, but it felt like hope mixed with a kindness he hadn't felt in a long time. "I know what it's like to lose someone," Danny cried now, his tears falling onto the wooden floor. "I know how much it hurts. I know what it's like to wake up every day hoping it's just a bad nightmare. But I also know that love doesn't die. My mom is still with me, even though I can't see her. And Emily is still here. I can feel it." Danny's words echoed through the circle, and Margaret noticed others had stopped their own prayers to listen. There was something in the boy's raw honesty that touched everyone present. "Please," Danny whispered, "if you can help this family, please do. They're good people. They deserve to be together." Danny opened his eyes, looking at Emily with an intensity that made Margaret hold her breath. Slowly, very slowly, he extended his small hands toward Emily's feet, stopping just a few inches away. "May I?" he asked, looking at Margaret. Margaret nodded, unable to speak through the overwhelming emotion. Danny hesitated for a moment, his hands trembling in the air. It was as if he was about to touch something sacred, something that could change him forever. The pressure in his chest had become almost unbearable, but with it came a certainty he had never felt before that he knew, somehow, that this was what he was born for this moment, for this family, for Emily. Breathing deeply, Danny prepared to touch Emily's feet, unaware that this simple gesture would change not only his life but everyone around him in ways none of them could imagine. Time seemed to stretch as Danny moved his hands those last few inches toward Emily's feet. The air around the sacred circle grew thick, heavy with an expectation no one could explain, but everyone could feel. It was as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Danny's hands, small, marked by scars earned from 2 years living on the ruthless streets of Los Angeles, trembled as they drew near. There were calluses on his palms from sleeping on cold concrete, scratches on his fingers from scavenging for food in trash bins. But in that moment, those same hands seemed to radiate a light that couldn't be seen, only felt, when his fingers finally touched Emily's feet that had been motionless for 6 long months. A wave of energy rippled through the temple like an invisible river. Margaret felt the hairs on her arms rise, while Robert experienced a tingling sensation climbing up his spine. Danny closed his eyes at the moment of contact, his head tilting forward as if receiving a gentle yet powerful electric current. His hands adjusted naturally to the contours of Emily's feet, as if he had always known exactly where to touch her. "You're coming back," Danny whispered, his voice barely audible yet carrying a conviction that resonated through the growing silence in the temple. The words poured from his lips like an ancient melody, a song he had never learned but always known. Margaret stopped crying suddenly, her tears drying on her cheeks as she watched the boy with a mixture of awe and wonder. There was something in the way he held Emily's feet, not like a stranger touching someone he didn't know, but like he was reconnecting two parts that had always belonged together. "Someone still needs your smile," Danny continued, his words flowing now with a rhythm that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside him. A place even he didn't know existed. "Your mother needs to hear your laughter again. Your father needs to see you dance through the kitchen like you used to." Robert felt his heart stop for a moment. Emily really did used to dance through the kitchen, especially on Sunday mornings when Margaret made pancakes. How could this boy, this stranger who had never known their daughter, know that? Pastor Williams, who had been observing from a respectful distance, sensed something shifting in the air around them. His decades of ministry had taught him to recognize sacred moments, and he knew he was witnessing something that transcended any religious denomination or specific belief. Something primal and pure was happening. "She's lost?" Danny murmured, his hands now moving slightly over Emily's feet as if he could feel something the doctors and their machines couldn't detect. "She's lost in a dark place and can't find her way back." Danny's words began to spread through the temple like ripples on a still lake. People praying softly started to fall silent, their eyes turning to the central circle where a street boy was performing something that seemed both human and divine. And an elderly woman in the third pew began to quietly cry, touched by the simple purity in Danny's words. A middle-aged man, who had come to pray for his own sick wife, felt a renewal of hope he hadn't experienced in months. "But she's not alone," Danny continued, tears falling again, this time with a surprising intensity. "There's a light around her. Her family's love is like a rope she can follow back. She just needs to remember how." Margaret looked at Robert, seeing her own emotions mirrored in her husband's eyes. Both had stopped crying, not because the pain had lessened, but because, for the first time in 6 months, they felt something beyond the pain. They felt hope. The entire temple was now in absolute silence. Even the sound of the medical machines monitoring Emily seemed to fade, as if they too were honoring the sacredness of the moment. It was as if everyone present, believers and skeptics, young and old, rich and poor, were united in recognizing that something extraordinary was happening. Danny could feel it too. The pressure in his chest had transformed into something different. Not an urgent pain anymore, but a warm current flowing through him like golden honey. It was as if Emily was communicating with him through his hands, trying to tell him something important. "I'm going to stay here," he whispered, his voice now choked with tears he couldn't stop. "I'm going to stay here and pray until you find your way back, because everyone deserves someone who doesn't give up on them." The words hit Margaret like a lightning bolt. This boy, who had lost everything, who lived on the streets with no one to care for him, was promising not to give up on their daughter. He was offering the only gift he had, his presence, his prayers, his unwavering faith. Robert felt something break inside him. Not something painful, but something that had been hardened by months of despair. It was as if a wall he had built around his heart was dissolving, allowing light in for the first time since the accident. Danny kept his hands on Emily's feet, praying with an intensity that seemed otherworldly. His words were now whispered too softly to be heard, but everyone in the temple could feel their power. It was as though he was weaving a web of hope around Emily. Strand by strand, prayer by prayer, minutes passed. How many? No one could say. Time had lost its usual meaning in that sacred space. There was only the eternal present, the moment when a lost boy found his mission and a desperate family found a new source of hope. Zeus, who had been lying silently beside the wheelchair, suddenly lifted his head, his ears twitching as if he could hear something humans could not. His eyes fixed on Emily's face, and for a moment, Margaret could swear she saw the dog smile. Finally, still in complete silence, Danny began removing his hands from Emily's feet. The motion was slow, reverent, as if he was saying goodbye to something precious. When his hands finally lost contact, he remained kneeling, his head bowed, breathing deeply. The temple stayed silent for a few more moments, as if everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. There was a sense of closure in the air, but also of a beginning, as if something important had ended and something even more important was about to begin. Danny slowly moved away from the wheelchair, still kneeling, his hands resting now on his thighs. His eyes remained closed, but there was a look of peace on his face Margaret had never seen before. Not in Danny, nor in anyone else. It was the look of someone who had found their purpose, who had done exactly what they were born to do. And in that moment, everyone in the temple knew they had witnessed something that would change their lives forever. The silence that followed Danny's touch was so deep that Margaret could hear her own heart beating. Everyone in the temple seemed to be holding their breath, as if afraid that any sound might break the spell of the sacred moment they had just witnessed. Danny remained kneeling, his head still bowed, hands resting on his thighs. Drops of sweat mixed with tears ran down his face, and he was breathing deeply, as if he had just run a marathon. There was exhaustion in his small shoulders, but also a peace radiating from him like the warmth of a fireplace. Margaret wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, preparing to thank the boy for his touching prayer when something caught her attention. A movement so subtle she first thought it was her imagination. A trick of her tear-weary eyes. Emily's right big toe had moved. Margaret blinked quickly, leaning forward in her chair. "No," she whispered to herself. "It can't be." But then it happened again. This time, it was two toes, twitching slightly against the hospital sock covering Emily's feet. The movement was small, almost imperceptible, but definitely real. "Oh my God," Margaret murmured, her voice starting to tremble. "Oh my God." Margaret's shout cut through the temple's silence like lightning. All heads turned toward her, seeing her point shakily at Emily's feet, eyes wide with shock and disbelief. "She moved!" Margaret shouted, her voice rising several octaves. "She moved! Robert, did you see? She moved!" Robert, who had been watching Danny with a look of deep respect, quickly turned to Emily. "What did you say?" "Her toes. They moved." Margaret was practically screaming now, frantically pointing at Emily's feet. "I saw it. I saw it with my own eyes." Robert ran to the side of the wheelchair, dropping to his knees beside Emily. His hands reached for her feet, watching them with such intensity that his hands trembled. "Emily? Emily, honey, can you hear me?" And then, as if responding to her father's voice, Emily's left pinky toe twitched. Then the next one, and the next. "Jesus Christ," Robert whispered, tears starting to flow again. "Jesus Christ. She is moving." Pastor Williams quickly approached, eyes fixed on Emily's feet. "Praise God," he murmured, his voice choked with emotion. "Praise the Almighty Lord." Danny finally lifted his head, his eyes still red and swollen. When he saw what was happening, a slow, radiant smile spread across his face. It wasn't a smile of surprise. It was a smile of recognition, as if he knew this would happen. "She's coming back," he whispered, his voice full of quiet joy. "She found the way." Now it was Emily's hands that began to move. First, only the fingers contracting and relaxing against the blankets. The movement was weak, but deliberate, as if she was trying to remember how to use her muscles. "Emily!" Margaret shouted, jumping from her chair and running to her daughter's side. "Emily, my love, can you hear me?" The whole temple erupted in exclamations of awe. People stood from their pews, some crying, others shouting in joy. Someone in the back started applause, and soon the sound spread through the congregation like wildfire. "A miracle!" someone shouted. "It's a miracle! Praise God!" Another voice joined the chorus. "Hallelujah! Hallelujah!" But Margaret and Robert had eyes only for Emily. Her arms began to move now, slowly, as if emerging from thick water. First the right arm, then the left, lifting a few inches off the wheelchair's armrest. Robert took Emily's hand, gently squeezing it. "Emily, honey, squeeze my hand if you can hear me." For a moment, nothing happened. Margaret held her breath, silently praying that the miracle would continue. Then, faint but unmistakable, came the pressure of Emily's fingers around her father's hand. "She squeezed!" Robert shouted, tears freely streaming down his face. "She squeezed my hand." Margaret was sobbing now, her knees buckling as she clung to the wheelchair's armrest. "Emily, my baby, Please open your eyes. Please, let mommy see your eyes. As if hearing her mother's plea, Emily's eyelids began to flutter. The movement was slow, labored, as if she was struggling against an invisible weight. But gradually, very gradually, they began to open. The whole temple fell silent again, but this time it was a silence of expectation, not uncertainty. All eyes were locked on Emily's face, waiting to see the eyes that had been closed for 6 long months. First, just a slit, then slowly more. Emily's eyelids continued to open, revealing eyes blinking confusedly against the temple's light. She seemed to be trying to focus, her head moving slightly from side to side. "Emily," Margaret whispered, her face just inches from her daughter's. "Emily, honey, can you see me?" Emily's eyes moved toward her mother's voice, blinking several times as she tried to focus. For a moment, there was only confusion on her face. But then, slowly, recognition began to awaken in her pupils. "Mom!" The word came out as a hoarse whisper, so faint that Margaret almost missed it. But it was there, clear and unmistakable. Margaret burst into sobs, her hands reaching up to cup Emily's cheeks. "Yes, my love. Yes, it's Mommy. I'm here." Robert joined the embrace, his large, gentle hands touching Emily's head. "I'm here too, honey. Daddy is here." Emily looked between her parents' faces, still blinking slowly. Where am I?" Her voice was weak, but growing stronger with each word. "You're safe," Margaret cried, kissing Emily's forehead. "You're safe, my love. You're back with us." The temple exploded in celebration. People stood, shouting, crying, hugging one another. It was as if the whole community was experiencing the miracle alongside the Harrison family. Emily tried to move, pressing her hands against the wheelchair's armrests. I want to sit up," she whispered. "Slow down, honey," Robert said, placing his hands behind Emily's back to support her. "Take it slow." With great effort, Emily began to sit up, her muscles trembling from the experience of movement after so long. Every inch was a struggle, but she kept going, determined to reconnect with the world she had left behind. Margaret glanced over her shoulder at Danny, who was still kneeling where he had been praying. Tears of joy were in his eyes, but there was something else, a deep exhaustion, as if he had given a part of himself to bring Emily back. "Thank you," she whispered to him, her voice filled with gratitude words could never fully express. Danny just smiled, a smile that seemed to hold all the wisdom in the world. "It wasn't me," he said softly. "It was your love that brought her back. I only showed her the way." Emily, now sitting partially in the wheelchair, looked around the temple with eyes growing clearer and more focused by the second. She was still weak, still clearly conscious, but she was there. She was awake. She was alive in a way she hadn't been for 6 months. And in the midst of the jubilant chaos of voices celebrating around them, the Harrison family embraced, knowing they had witnessed something that would change their lives forever. The next few minutes were a whirlwind of emotions that seemed to defy reality. Emily, still trembling from the effort of sitting up, looked around the sanctuary with growing clarity in her green eyes. Her breathing was uneven, but each inhale seemed to bring more life back into her body. "I remember," she whispered, her voice still hoarse but gaining strength. "I remember hearing a voice telling me not to give up." Margaret and Robert exchanged glances, their hearts breaking and mending at the same time. 6 months of prayers, 6 months of vigils at the hospital, 6 months of doctors saying it might be best to prepare for the worst, and now their daughter was there, talking to them. Emily made an effort to move her legs, testing muscles that had been dormant for so long. I want to stand up," she said, determination growing in her voice. "Honey, maybe you should take it slow," Robert began, but Emily was already moving, placing her hands on the arms of the wheelchair. "No," she said more firmly. "I need to stand up. I have to." With Margaret on one side and Robert on the other, Emily slowly rose from the wheelchair. Her legs shook violently, muscles that had lost strength struggling to remember how to hold up her body weight. But she did not give up. "Slowly, my love," Margaret murmured, holding Emily's arm tightly. "We're here. We won't let you fall." The entire sanctuary watched in respectful silence, every person witnessing the miracle unfolding before their eyes. It was like watching someone be reborn, each movement from Emily a declaration of life over death, hope over despair. When Emily was finally standing fully upright, wobbly but steady, she scanned the sanctuary with new curiosity. Her eyes swept over the amazed faces of the congregation, Pastor Williams openly weeping, and the familiar decoration of the sanctuary where she had grown up. Then her eyes found Danny. "Where's the boy?" she asked, her voice carrying an urgency that surprised even herself. Danny was still kneeling where he had been praying, but now he looked like he was in shock. His hands trembled, his eyes wide with disbelief. It was as if he couldn't fully process what had happened, what he had been a part of making happen. I didn't," Danny stammered, his voice barely audible. I didn't know this was going to happen." Emily spotted him through the crowd, her eyes locking onto the boy who seemed so small and vulnerable kneeling on the floor. There was something about him she recognized, something that resonated deeply in her soul, as if she had known him from somewhere beyond this life. "I need to talk to him," Emily said, taking a tentative step toward Danny. Margaret and Robert immediately moved with her, forming a living support system as she navigated her first steps in 6 months. Each step was a struggle, but also a victory. Emily's feet, frozen for so long, now moved with purpose. Her muscles protested loudly, but she pressed on, determined to reach the boy who had whispered words of hope into her darkness. The entire sanctuary watched in reverent silence as Emily made her slow but steady journey across the sacred space. It was like a procession, each step carrying the weight of a miracle and gratitude. Danny remained still, tears streaming down his face as he watched Emily approach. There was an expression of pure wonder in his eyes, as if he were seeing something beyond his understanding. His hands pressed against the floor, steadying him as he struggled to grasp the magnitude of what had happened. "I heard you," Emily said when she was just a few steps away, her voice growing stronger with each word. "When everything was dark, when I couldn't find my way, I heard your voice telling me not to give up." Danny swallowed hard, more tears falling from his eyes. I just prayed," he whispered. I didn't know it would work." "You knew," Emily said gently, stopping in front of him. "Deep down, you knew." Carefully, supported by Margaret and Robert, Emily knelt in front of Danny. The movement was slow and deliberate, every muscle working to find its place. When she finally reached eye level with him, the intensity of the connection between them was palpable. "Thank you," Emily whispered, her own tears beginning to fall. "Thank you for bringing me back." Danny couldn't speak. Silent sobs shook his small shoulders as he looked at Emily's face. A face that had been pale and still for months, now flushed with life and glowing with gratitude. "I didn't do anything special," he finally managed to say, his voice breaking with emotion. I just didn't want you to be lost." "You did everything," Emily replied, reaching out her hands to him. "You gave me hope when I had none left. You showed me there were still people who cared." The entire sanctuary was in tears now. Even the toughest men were openly weeping, touched by the pure beauty of the moment. It was as if everyone was witnessing something that redefined their understanding of what was possible in the world. Pastor Williams slowly approached, his voice choked with emotion. "Lord, today we have witnessed your glory. We have seen your love working through your smallest children." Danny looked at Emily, seeing not just the young woman who had awakened from a coma, but someone who had become a permanent part of his soul. There was a connection between them now that defied explanation. Two people who had found each other at the exact moment they needed each other most. "I was lost too," Danny admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was lost and scared, and I didn't know what to do with my life. But praying for you, that gave me purpose." Emily smiled through her tears, a look of deep understanding crossing her eyes. "So we saved each other." Without another word, Emily leaned forward and wrapped Danny in a hug. It was a hug that carried 6 months of darkness turned into light, Weeks of life on the streets transformed into purpose, and two lost souls finding each other exactly when they needed it most. Danny melted into the embrace, his sobs finally breaking free. He had spent so long feeling invisible, unwanted, forgotten by the world. But in that moment, held in the arms of someone he had helped save, he felt more seen and valued than he ever had in his whole life. Margaret and Robert looked at each other over the heads of the two young people, their own eyes full of tears of gratitude. They had gotten their daughter back, but they had also gained something more. They had witnessed the transformative power of unconditional love, unwavering faith, and human connection at its purest. The sanctuary around them echoed with silent sobs and whispered prayers, every person there touched by the living proof that miracles still happen, that love still has the power to overcome darkness, and that sometimes the most unlikely people become God's instruments for healing and redemption. In that embrace, Danny finally stopped crying out of pain and began crying out of relief. Relief at having found his place in the world, at discovering that even a lost and forgotten child could be used to bring hope and healing to others. And Emily, holding the boy who had whispered life back into her world, knew that her journey back to life was only just beginning. The tumultuous chatter inside the temple had quieted to reverent whispers as the congregation watched Emily and Danny embrace. But for Robert, that moment of calm was filled with a flood of questions he could no longer hold back. He looked at the boy, really looked at him for the first time, and noticed details he had missed before. The worn but clean clothes, the shoes with worn soles, the way Danny slightly shrank back when adults approached, as if expecting rejection. There was a maturity in his eyes that shouldn't belong to a child, an understanding of pain that came only from experience. "Son," Robert said gently, stepping closer to where Emily and Danny were still holding each other. "What's your full name?" Danny slowly pulled away from Emily, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "Danny," he said simply, as if there was nothing more to add. "Danny what?" Margaret asked, her voice maternal and edged with growing worry. "Where are your parents, honey?" The boy lowered his eyes, nervously fiddling with the hem of his shirt. "I don't have parents," he whispered. I live out there." Pastor Williams, who had been watching the exchange with increasing concern, stepped forward. "Robert, Margaret, could I speak with you for a moment?" The three adults stepped back a few paces, leaving Emily sitting on the floor near Danny, instinctively offering him the comfort of her presence. "This boy," Pastor Williams began, his voice low but heavy with emotion. "He's been coming to our temple for months, always quiet, always sitting in the back, always praying for others." Margaret felt her heart tighten. "For others?" "Every week," the pastor continued, "he comes with a mental list of people to pray for. Lonely seniors, struggling families, sick children. He never asks for anything for himself. Never. I've tried talking to him several times, offered help, but he always disappears before I can learn more about his situation." Robert ran a hand through his hair, a growing unease settling in his chest. "You're saying he lives on the streets?" "I suspect so," Pastor Williams replied sadly. "I've seen him a few times downtown. Always alone, always taking care of himself. There's a network of street kids there. They look out for one another, sleep in abandoned shelters, do whatever they can to survive." Margaret covered her mouth with her hands, fresh tears welling up. "My God! And we didn't even know. While we were so focused on our own pain." "You couldn't have known," Pastor Williams said gently. "Danny is very good at staying invisible. But there's something special about him, something I've been watching for months. He has a gift, if you want to call it that, for feeling other people's pain." Robert furrowed his brow. "What do you mean?" "I've watched him," the pastor explained. "When Mrs. Henderson was battling cancer, Danny spent weeks praying specifically for her, without even knowing her personally. When little Sarah Miller went missing last month, he didn't eat for 2 days, just prayed until she was found. It's as if he can feel when people are hurting." Margaret looked back at Danny, who was now whispering something to Emily, his eyes still red but shining with a kindness that broke her heart. "How old is he?" "I'd say around 12, maybe 13, Pastor Williams answered. "But he acts like he's 30. The streets do that to kids. They grow up too fast, learn to survive when they should be learning to play. Robert felt a transformation stirring inside him, as if the miracle he had witnessed was changing not just Emily, but his entire perspective on life. For months, he had been so consumed by his own pain that he had become blind to the suffering around him. But now, looking at Danny, he saw it clearly. "He saved our daughter," Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. "This boy, who has nothing, who lives on the streets, he saved our daughter." They returned to where Emily and Danny were whispering softly. Emily, despite her obvious weakness, wore a determined expression. "Mom, Dad," she said as they approached. "Danny told me where he lives. He can't keep living like that." Danny shrank back slightly, as if expecting rejection. "I'm fine," he muttered. "I've always managed." "No," Emily said with a firmness that surprised them all. "You shouldn't have to manage alone. You saved my life, Danny. You brought me back from the darkness. You need a family." Robert looked at Margaret, seeing his own thought mirrored in her eyes. Without words, they reached the same conclusion. "Danny," Robert said, kneeling to meet the boy's level, "would you like to come live with us? In Dallas?" Danny froze, his eyes wide with shock. "I what?" "You gave us our daughter back," Margaret said, tears streaming freely. "You gave us our family back. Now we want to give you a family." Danny shook his head quickly. "I can't. I'm not the kind of kid people want at home. I'm hard to handle. I have nightmares. I don't know how to be part of a family." "We didn't know how to be a family after the accident either," Robert said gently. "We were lost, angry, broken apart. But you showed us how to find our way back to each other." Emily reached out, touching Danny's arm. "I want you there when I wake up in the morning. I want you there when I go to sleep at night. You are part of my healing, Danny. You are part of my family now." Danny looked from the three faces, seeing not pity, but genuine love. It was an emotion he had seen from a distance for so many years, but never experienced personally. "I don't know how to be someone's son," he whispered. "We'll learn together," Margaret said, opening her arms. "We'll learn how to be a family again. All of us." Danny hesitated for a long moment, years of survival instinct battling with a desperate desire to belong somewhere. Then he looked at Emily, saw the tears of gratitude in her eyes, and knew he couldn't leave her again. "Okay?" he whispered, barely audible. "Okay, I'll try." Margaret wrapped him in a hug, feeling Danny's small frame tremble against hers. "We'll take care of you," she murmured in his ear. "We'll take care of you like you took care of us." Robert placed his hands on their shoulders, his voice thick with emotion. "We're going home," he said. "All of us. We're going home." With the help of her parents, Emily managed to stand again. She was stronger now, as if each moment of consciousness brought more life back to her body. "Danny," she said, "you're going to like Dallas. We have a big backyard, and there's a good school nearby. You'll have your own room." Danny looked at her with an expression of wonder. "My own room?" "Your own room," Robert confirmed. "With your own bed, your own things. A place that's just yours." Fresh tears sprang from Danny's eyes, but this time they were tears of hope, not pain. "I've never had my own room," he admitted. "Well," Margaret said, smiling through her own tears, "now you do. Now you have a home, a room, and a family that loves you." Pastor Williams stepped forward, his own voice choked with emotion. "God works in mysterious ways," he said. "He brought you all together just when you needed each other most." As the family prepared to leave the temple, Danny glanced back one last time. This place had been his refuge for months, the only spot where he felt safe enough to pray and hope. But now he was leaving behind a life of lonely survival and embracing something he had never dared to dream. A family that wanted him, a place where he belonged, a home. "Thank you," he whispered to the temple, to the God who had heard his prayers, and to the family who had chosen to make him part of their story of miracle and redemption. Autumn in Dallas painted the windows of the Harrison mansion with golden and orange hues, creating a warm, cozy atmosphere that spread throughout the house. The aroma of roast turkey and pumpkin pie floated down the hallways, blending with the sound of laughter and lively conversations coming from the dining room. 6 months had passed since that life-changing day at the temple in Tyler, and the house that had once echoed with silence and sorrow now hummed with renewed life and love. Emily, her chestnut hair now long and shiny, moved through the house with an energy that seemed to radiate its own light. Her medical books were scattered across the library table, silent witnesses to her determination to turn her experience into a lifelong mission. "Danny," she called out, her voice echoing down the stairs. "Can you help me set the table?" From the second floor came a cheerful reply. "I'm coming down now." Danny Harrison. He still got emotional every time he heard his full name. Came down the stairs with the same humility that had always characterized him. But now there was a confidence in his movements that hadn't been there before. 6 months of unconditional love, regular meals, and his own room carefully decorated by Margaret had transformed the lonely boy into a confident young man, though his gentle nature remained intact. "Did you finish your homework?" Emily asked, arranging the fine china on the dining table. "I did," Danny replied, helping her with the silverware. "Mrs. Johnson said my essay on gratitude was the best in class." Margaret came out of the kitchen, removing her apron and smiling at the sight of her 2 children working together. The word children still surprised her sometimes. How natural it had become to accept Danny as part of the family, as if he had always belonged there. "Of course it was the best," she said, kissing the top of Danny's head. "You have a lot to write about when it comes to gratitude." Robert came in through the front door, returning from a meeting at the office. His business had flourished over the past few months, as if his renewed outlook on life had translated into professional success. But more importantly, he had started dedicating significant time to charity work, especially causes that helped homeless children. "How are my 3 treasures?" he asked, hanging up his coat and immediately being wrapped in a warm hug from Emily. "Dad, you're just in time," Emily said. "We were finishing up dinner preparations." Danny still felt moved hearing Emily call Robert Dad without hesitation, and when Robert naturally included him among his treasures, there were moments when he pinched himself, still unable to fully believe this life was real. "Danny, do you remember how impressed we were with your grades?" Robert said, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Your math teacher said you have a natural gift for numbers." "He's always been special," Margaret said, bringing the last dishes from the kitchen. "We just gave him the chance to shine." As they gathered around the abundantly prepared table, there was a palpable sense of completeness hanging over the family. The table, which for so many months had been a place of uncomfortable silence, now resonated with lively conversations, shared laughter, and stories of the day. "Before we begin," Robert said, standing up, "I'd like to say a few words." The family turned to him, their faces lit by the soft candlelight on the table. "1 year ago, we were a broken family," Robert began, his voice heavy with emotion. "We had lost our hope, our faith, our connection to each other. But God had other plans for us." He looked at Danny, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "He sent us an angel disguised as a boy who had nothing but gave us everything." Danny lowered his eyes, still uncomfortable with praise, but Emily took his hand under the table, offering silent strength. "Today on Thanksgiving, I'm grateful not just to have my daughter back, but to have gained a son who taught me that family isn't just about blood. It's about love. It's about choosing to care for one another. It's about faith in hard times." Margaret wiped her eyes with her napkin, her voice trembling as she added, "Danny, you saved our family in more ways than just waking Emily up. You showed us how to love again." Emily stood slowly, her eyes shining with an intensity that reminded Robert of the day she had awakened. "I want to say a few words too." She looked around the table, seeing the 3 people who had become the center of her world. 6 months ago, I was lost in complete darkness. I couldn't find my way back to the light, to life, to you. But then I heard a voice. Her voice grew stronger as she continued. It was the voice of a boy who didn't know me but cared enough to pray for me. A boy who was living on the streets, who had no family, no possessions, but who had more faith than any of us. Tears now freely streamed down her face. He woke me up with a gesture of faith the world has forgotten. At a time when people pass each other by without caring, when we're all so busy with our own lives that we don't see the suffering around us, Danny reminded me that there are still people who care about strangers. He taught me that miracles don't come from extraordinary places. They come from ordinary hearts that choose to love when it would be easier to turn away. Emily turned to Danny, her voice soft but firm. You didn't just save me, Danny. You saved our whole family. You brought us back to one another. The table was silent except for the soft sound of emotional sobs. Robert opened his arms, and soon all four were wrapped in a family embrace that seemed to last forever. I love you, son, Robert whispered in Danny's ear. I love you as if you were born of me. I love you too, Dad, Danny replied, the word now coming naturally without hesitation. After dinner, while Margaret and Robert cleaned up the kitchen, Emily took Danny to the back porch. The night air was cool, and the first stars were starting to appear in the Dallas sky. Danny, Emily said, sitting beside him on the porch swing, could you teach me how to pray like you prayed that day? Danny looked at her in surprise. You want to learn to pray like me? I want to learn to pray with the same love you had, Emily explained. I want to learn to care about strangers the way you cared about me. Danny smiled, remembering the lonely boy who used to kneel at the back of the temple. It's not hard, he said. You just close your eyes and talk to God like he's your best friend. But how did you know to pray for me? How did you know I needed it? Danny thought for a moment, his eyes fixed on the stars. I think when you've been lost for so long, you learn to feel when other people are lost too. And when you have nothing, you learn that giving love is the only thing that really matters. Emily closed her eyes, following Danny's lead. Dear God, she began, her voice soft in the night. Thank you for bringing me back. Thank you for giving me a family. And thank you for teaching me that sometimes we are healed through the love we give, not just the love we receive. Danny smiled, joining his voice with hers. And thank you for giving me a family that loves me just the way I am. Help us always remember to care for one another and to care for those who are still lost. From the kitchen, Robert and Margaret watched their children through the window, their hearts overflowing with gratitude. They had lost a daughter in an accident but had gained a complete family through the faith of a boy who had nothing to give but love. Do you think he knows? Margaret whispered. The miracle he created? Robert wrapped his arm around his wife, watching Danny and Emily pray together under the stars. I think that's the beauty of simple acts of love, he said. They change lives forever, but the person who makes them rarely realizes the power they hold. On the porch, Emily and Danny finished their prayer in comfortable silence, both knowing their lives had been woven together by something greater than coincidence. They had learned that family isn't just about being born in a house. It's about choosing to love and be loved, about finding home in the hearts of others. The night wind carried the scent of autumn leaves and the promise of new beginnings. And in the Harrison mansion, for hearts beat as one, forever united by the simple truth that a gesture of faith, no matter how small, can awaken miracles and change lives for eternity. Their story was living proof that love still conquers darkness, that faith still moves mountains, and that sometimes angels come disguised as lost children who choose to care for strangers instead of only for themselves.
If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. These other stories will also move you. Click to keep watching.